filling in my bottom teeth.
Okay. So then, let's talk about. I mean, we'll talk about you lived with Tante Elizabeth. You don't have to, tell what happened for the entire 4 years, but
2 years.
2 years. Well, you were there. I thought you moved there when you were 14.
No, when I was 14, I went to India for 2 years. 1 year Handelsschule, which is business school, and 1 year finishing school or domestic. And it was called finishing because you learned also about art and other things, but it doesn't matter. And then with 16, from 16 to 18, I was with St. Elizabeth because I couldn't work for Uncle Connie, or Omi's cousin, or uncle, but it happens, never mind, same age. And then from there, you had to be 18 in order to go to England as an au pair. So I was 18 and went to England.
So, did you want to be an au pair? Was that something that a lot of people wanted to do, or was that sort of just a way to get out?
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting. Yeah, to get out. I mean, I was not happy working for my uncle, doing odd jobs, And besides, he was after me, and I won't say that, but he was a lecherous man.
Oh. Did you know anybody else who was an au pair who wanted to do that?
And Hildegard. I can say that Hildegard and I. Did I mention that I shared a room with Hildegard?
No.
Huh? No, what did I say about Tante Elizabeth?
Just what I told you. You didn't talk too much about the living arrangements.
And I didn't go as far as going to as an au pair?
Right. You just basically said you were there, you were working, and that's about where we stopped.
And that she was nice but poor.
Yeah.
And then I gave her all my money. Again, no money, spending money left, because she needed it. So what happened is that Hildegard's English teacher asked Tante Elizabeth, do you have a place for Hildegard as au pair? And she said, yes, for your daughter. And she said, yeah, but only for one daughter, not for the other, meaning me. And so then she said, I have some place where I could go. And that's how it came about. And for me, it was wonderful, something new to do, to see, homeless.
Yeah.
All right. Why not?
Did you see Omi or any of the family before you left?
No. No, I saw very rarely. Because, are you taping this? Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
Omi, no, it was very difficult for Omi to go to Germany. And my father died by then, so, and for my siblings it was very difficult. No, so I went to England and by ship and then railroad. And I remember sitting on the platform of the railroad station, nobody there to pick up, all these people speaking a language I couldn't understand. And I hear her sitting on my huge suitcase. And then a man with a cap came, and he was the butler of the mother of the lady where I was supposed to be. Apparently their ship hadn't arrived yet from the United States. They were military diplomats in Washington. So I came to this lady, and she was very nice, and she was listening to Billy Graham, to a Billy Graham crusade. She said to me, did you like this? And I said, yes, but what means Christ? Of course, there was a lot of talk about Christ. I didn't even understand that. I knew I had a little school English, maybe a couple of years, and never knew when to say yes and when to say no, but it took me a year, and then I could understand And when they came, it was a lovely family, 4 children. Later they had another one. And I was just a mother's helper, whatever she wanted me to do, and I helped mostly her and the children. And we did some cleaning, everything together, and we sewed curtains for the next house they were going to move, and she was listening to terrible criminal stories on the radio, which scared me. I didn't want to listen to this. I don't like anything like that, any kind of action. But I had no choice. And yeah, they were very kind and very nice, and they had cocktail parties, and I had help serve. And I remember I noticed people saying, that was probably in the beginning when I had my tray with all the goodies, I heard them say no thank you, so I went up to them and said no thank you, because I thought that instead of saying would you like something. So
this was 1950?
No, this was 1955.
1955.
Yeah, I was at 55 until 56. And then this colonel, follower, or the one who took over for him in Washington, needed an au pair. And so he came over and visited and looked me over, which I didn't know, and then they wrote, and would I like to come to Washington, D.C.? So I thought that wonderful, because my family in England, my English family knew that I was interested in it, because I knew Russian as well, and I wanted to know something about the opposite. And I had happy memories when Americans came, and we had chocolate and food, a parcel. So I came on the Queen Mary, which is now Long Beach, as a hotel, and it took about maybe a week, I can't remember. And I took 2 of the children with me, 10 and 14, who were in a English boarding school. And then the family picked me up, and they had twins, 11 maybe, and we went immediately to Maine for a month of vacation, which was wonderful, but also very cold.
So the children you were with on the boat, they were the children of the family you were going to?
Yes.
And they just happened to be in England?
Yes, they
were in boarding
school in England. You know, I think sometimes when they're 6 or something, really young. And so they wanted to make sure they got good schooling, and so they came back. And this family not quite as happy and friendly as the English one, and they had problems, but they were very nice and brought all the au pair girls together, all the diplomats that they knew who had au pair girls, and we would go and see each other on our day off. Especially at Christmas time, we had celebrated Christmas Day together, and I know we took a trip to New York to see New York by bus, and then stayed in YWCA. Excuse me. I'm talking too much.
So you went to New York?
Mm-hmm. And then before I stayed in England, I was a year and a half, and I was a year with this new family in America. And then his time was up, and he was ready to go back to England, and he decided to see all the forts. So of course I came along to help with the children, and we had an old Studebaker, and we drove, and I remember his wife driving, and by mistake down the hill, stopping on the brake real hard. So, but I got to see Fort Knox and all the way to El Paso. Of course, it was very exciting to just go through the country. El Paso was the furthest.
So the whole family was in one car?
Yeah, there wasn't actually much space there. I remember getting a car sick. Yeah, unless it could have been that the children had gone back. I can't remember now. I think there were just two, maybe. I've no remembrance how many we were.
You know what? I want to go back just a little bit to the first family.
Yeah.
Their names.
Yes.
So the name of the first family in England.
Yeah, the first. Yeah, I see quite frequently whenever I'm in England. But what is her name?
Do you remember the last name of the family?
Haywood.
Haywood.
Yeah.
Was a colonel?
Yeah, but when you retire, you become the next higher up, and so he was a brigadier. And Gunther and my husband and I, we visited him twice. And then later I went by myself. And I have a blank now. And she lives in Cornwall, and so, or close to Cornwall. And but we went to Cornwall. We saw King Arthur's castle, Tintagel.
Is that where you got to know Jessie and Hanukkah?
Yeah, Jessie and Hanukkah were the au pairs in America, and we had a lifelong friendship. And unfortunately, Hanukkah died early, but I became friends with her husband's new wife, and we're still friends to this day. And Jessie, and the other one is Sarah, and she lives in Wales. And one thing I always felt we should keep up. I kept up with my friends from when I was 12, and still see them to this day. And I always sent a Christmas card to Jessie and Sarah, telling them where the other one was. And now they're half an hour apart, and they get together at least once a week, and they're really happy. So it's keep your friends for life. It's very important. Of course, now with this modern technology, you do anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh gosh, how is it possible that I don't remember? They were 8, 7, and 3, and 1. Joy was 1. John was 3. And then they had another girl, and it was Joyce. And the oldest one that I know so well, I cannot. This is what happens when you get older. Totally blank in a moment. So,
well, when you lived in their house, did you have your own room?
Yes, I had my own room, and I got some money, and there was a nice Swiss girl, and unfortunately I did not keep up with her. The last time I heard from her was when I was in America, and I don't know whose fault it was. Neither one of us wrote, maybe. But that family was just an older couple, invited me and Dina was her name, to see Covent Garden, to see a fantastic ballet. Now that's gone too, with Margot Fonteyn and Michael Soames. And Margot Fonteyn, the famous dancer, was probably in her 30s then, 35. And they said, well, she has to retire. And as far as I know, she danced into her 50s. So that was fantastic. And it was, oh, Pete, I'm not prepared.
That's okay.
And I thought, I never want to see it again, because nobody will be able to dance this beautiful as they did. Swan Lake, ha ha ha. At least something came back. Maybe the two.
I was going to say Swan Lake just because it's the only ballet I know.
Yeah.
But that would be too obvious.
Yeah, and Covent Garden, so that was the highlight, and I kept it. I think I still have the program. Oh, how can I not remember the two names? But those will come tomorrow.
Yeah. So then to go back to where we were, you were...
Actually, we hitchhiked together.
Who did?
In England. I did with Dina, and who else was there? Maybe Hildegard for a while, and that was no problem. With Dina, I think we went to Cornwall with our bicycles, and then I went all the way north to Loch Lomond and looked for the monster, and that was a hitchhiking trip. It was still pretty safe then. Everybody was very nice, and we would, when we were on these tours, when we had a little time, we would eat bread and jam, and then once in a while fish and chips. And that was the best. And it was still in the newspaper, and of course now it would never be permitted. But it was, yeah, it was fun.
So then, okay, so you were in America. You were with the second family, and you were going on a trip through America.
Before they left. Did I say, what was I just going to say now? Last time you took this, I was still more with it.
It was 3 years ago.
It was 3 years ago. Yeah, and then while I was there, I met your father with an American family.
So when you were living with them, that's when you met Dad?
Yeah, yeah.
And you were 20 then?
I was 20 when I came to the States, and yeah, so I was 20 and he was 27, yeah, and I was 20, almost 21, 22 when we got married. Yeah, and you want to know that too?
Yeah.
Yeah. They lived in a good area in Washington, Northwest, Massachusetts, off Massachusetts Avenue, and things were pretty safe, but still, I guess I did not say that we au pair girls would go to the International Student House to dance, or to the YMCA for little get-togethers, and one girl, I didn't know her very well, lived a few streets away, and she wanted to go to this dance that was on K or Q Street, I think. And I didn't want to go at all. It was Valentine's Day, 1957. Yeah, then I must have been 21. And I didn't want her to go by herself. So I went with her, and we went on the bus and got off and went there, and there was nothing happening. We were too early. And then she said, oh, I know a cafe around the corner. That would be Connecticut Avenue. And so we went in there. And for the longest time, I even knew the name of it. And then Dad walked in, and he was tall and blonde, and I thought he was a Swede or something. And he talked to, and my friend knew him and introduced us. And I was so excited to find out that he spoke German, because he was from Austria, that I naively said, we're going to go dancing, do you want to come? And that's why the rest of our marriage, he would say I picked him up, which I guess I did, but I didn't realize it because I had no experience in these areas. So, and of course, like I said, he was actually 6 years older. Yeah. Yeah. And so we went there, and he had this old Buick. And then I danced with anybody who asked me. And there were people from Indonesia and Africa and mostly, well, international students. But Dad was standing in the corner and already had made up his mind he was going to marry me, because he's had some girlfriends and he was fed up. And he said, how dare my wife dance with all these people? That was already in his head. So, and yeah, and then we started to go to dances. We loved to dance. He was a very good dancer. And and I stayed. Yeah, and then my family left, but I wanted to stay. And actually, I wanted to be an au pair in France, but I decided to stay. And so I found a room with another girl. That was so common. You shared a room, two twin beds and a closet, and he had a friend at the Indian embassy. And so when I was there on a diplomatic visa because of my family, and the only place I could work was at embassies or international funds, and there I got a job in the at the Indian advertisement and it was an awful dirty place. And I don't know if I was of any use what I was doing.
What was it again? The Indian
embassy. Indian embassy, and she got me a job there, and there was a nice Indian family, and they invited me one weekend, and I got to eat Indian food, and it was all new to me that you put your hand in the bowl and kind of lick your fingers. So that was one nice experience, and then.
Well, let me ask you, why did you decide to stay?
Because I had met your father, and I thought he was kind of nice.
So you stayed.
Actually, he wouldn't let me go.
Okay.
He thought I should stay.
So he said, "I don't want you to go to France. I want you to stay here."
Yeah, that's about it.
So did you have any boyfriends before then?
There was one in England. I was one of military. Yeah, I went out a little bit, and then when I came to America, there was one from the girl who left, and he kind of thought he wanted to take me over then, and so we went to the Library of Congress, because he played cello. Was it cello? Or was it piano? Well, piano too. I don't know. And I don't know much about him. Phil was his name.
He was American?
American, yeah. And I just wasn't into America yet. And but he liked music, and we could, if we waited outside, we could go in for free. And that's what we did a few times. And then he thought, he wanted to introduce me to his family, and I did that too. And then all of a sudden, everybody was I had the feeling they thought we were engaged or something, and I was really scared. And so I broke up. So I don't know. He was nice, but I had no other intentions, and I don't know how that came about. That he thought more than so.
Yeah.
That's and then I think I met your father. I always thought it would be nice to marry somebody German, and at least speak German.
Yeah.
Even though when I was in Bavaria after the war, they said, "Be careful, the Austrians cheat." The Bavarians and the Austrians, they always have little arguments back and forth.
They cheat like at games or in marriage?
No, I think food. At that time, everybody, because nobody had any money, nobody had, food. No, I think it had to do with just surviving, because it was after the war.
Yeah.
And, like when you go to Italy, you make sure you get the right change back. And
I see.
so that kind of thing, which wasn't true at all. It was just being nasty.
Yeah. So.
Yeah.
So you were living with this girl in a room?
I was living with this girl, and I met your dad. He lived in a boarding house, and already when he had friends behind the embassy, there was a house. I still remember 2231 California Street, And he had friends there. Upstairs there was Hubert, he was from Hungary, and he was with the underground military, FBI kind of person. Then there were two women, three actually, on the fifth floor, all Austrian from the Austrian embassy. And then in the elevator he met Sigi, whom I had known in Bremen years ago when did I say anything about Britta? No. We knew each other through Scandinavian students who came business students to have a practicum in Bremen, and one lived 2 houses, a girl 2 years older, Britta from Denmark, 2 houses next to where I was with Tante Elisabeth. And so she wanted me to get to know her, and so we became really good friends. And once in a while these groups and she would include me to their outings, and they would meet in the Bremen Ratskeller for some wine. And I saw Sigi there, and she was in a different group, and we just smiled at each other, because the Bremen people are a little stiff like the English. Unless you've been introduced, you really don't talk to them, to each other. and here he met, and then it turned out that we knew each other. And she was staying with one of the Austrians, and just couldn't get any peace, because this poor woman had a daughter who was in a daycare and mistreated, and she was so nervous and upset, and these vibes were in the room, and she said, I've got to get out of there. So we both decided to get an efficiency apartment in the first floor, and that was like a living room, kitchen, a little corner where you could eat. Of course we didn't have a dining room, and bathroom. And your dad, of course, was very handy, and so he helped us. He covered an old couch and got a door and put 4 legs on it. And so between the couch and the other one was a roll-away bed. If we wanted to eat, we all sat on the floor and tried to get our legs past each other. And so that was very nice. And often when the others came home, they would always stop down there, and then we would just start and drink and celebrate and find some bread and cheese. And so it was pretty, yeah, what the young people do in those days, or did.
So that's the same building the dad lived in?
No. He lived in another building, and I don't know when, and he lived with a friend, Jack. And so they knew each other, and the problem was when Sigi and I lived, and then we got to know each other, and we were really good friends. And then Dad and I, of course, were too, and we decided to get married, and we became engaged. And so it was very difficult to please these two. I was torn between my fiance and my girlfriend, and they had the same birthday, March 19th, but they were 4 years apart. And so Dad said to Jack, I don't know, Ulla lives with this girl, and I just cannot get along with her. And so we talked a little bit, and then Jack said, oh, that sounds interesting. And so he cooked one of his wonderful dishes, dumplings and goulash, and all 4 of us sat on the floor and had our meal. And then pretty soon those two disappeared, and started to date, and separated one time, and then got married, and we're still best friends to this day. And so
how long were you and Dad dating before you got engaged?
Oh, I don't know. We met in February, Valentine's Day, 57, got married August 58. So that's,
wow.
Yeah. And we went, and I went to Austria once and met his family.
Before you were engaged?
Before we, yeah, and yes. And on the airplane, actually, he asked me to marry him on the airplane between Austria and probably Frankfurt, New York. Yeah.
How did he do that?
I was sitting next to him. How can you do really in an airplane?
Yeah.
And yeah, but the thing was that he was a wonderful man, as you know, and he was very knowledgeable and interested in every area. But because of the circumstances, his father died in the war, and no one there really to take care of him, and I think he always felt he should have also studied medicine or something and couldn't after the war. So I think in the early years he had an inferiority complex and took to drinking, and also because he had friends. One of the friends the Austrians, it was so easy for them to get to alcohol, and then of course he was in Bermuda as a bartender, and so, but I had no idea because I was so naive, and I thought an alcoholic is somebody in the ditch, and I never thought anyone else who was educated would be addicted, and I didn't really know it until our honeymoon. And we did have, and we had a very small wedding. Nobody from the family could come, and but we went, since I had Lutheran background, and he also, because most of Austria is Catholic, but they were Lutherans. But during the Hitler's years, because his father was believed in Hitler, they stepped out of the church, and your dad did too, because of the church. He was working in different countries, and when he came back he had to pay all this church tax that they take. You know, it's not that here, you know, the community, the congregation gives the money, but it is just taken out of your checkbook, your paycheck. And he wasn't about to, so that was the main reason he did and didn't. So,
well, where did you get married?
In Washington, D.C. So there was a big Lutheran church. So it's the only time we went there and got married, because we felt we needed to. And I just took my vows, and I thought I would be married for life, for better or worse. And and then.
Well, who was in the wedding party?
In the wedding party were the Austrians, of course, and then there was another couple, and then Sarah, my au pair friend. She married an American too. I remember how she considered, should I or shouldn't I, because she was English. So it's the other one we had a long connection with. And there weren't too many people, and some from work maybe, and yeah, and then we went back to our room and where we lived now, because Sigi.
Wait a minute, did you live together?
No, not until we got married.
Yeah.
We didn't do that in those days.
Well.
And as far as I know, Sigi moved out, and when we got married, we moved in the same apartment. And so we had just we had a cake, and when the pastor walked in, I got a migraine, and I had to go upstairs, 5th floor, to one of my friend's room to just because I did get those migraines, but actually not very often. But it was so awful. And I was probably nervous and all the excitement. And
so this was the wedding. After the wedding, the party, the reception.
Yeah, the wedding was Erich, Dad's friend. He was Dad was the best man for him, and Erich was the best man for, no, he was my father, and he took all the photos. And the best man was somebody who we really didn't know very well. That, I don't know why Dad chose him, but...
Who was your maid of honor?
Siggy.
Siggy.
Yeah, Siggy and Jack. But the problem was, I guess, the day was because Dad celebrated the evening before, and I called him in the morning about the wedding and to get the cake, and he had no idea. He was totally drunk. And so therefore, I had a bad day, the wedding day, and so, I think that all, caused that migraine and the headache, that I really felt sick. And then while I was in that room, another couple wanted to come up and relax, and I was in the bed. So those were different, no, well, maybe not different times. So, and then we went on our honeymoon, and with the VW we had, and Dad had, and I didn't. Oh yeah, I did learn. Before we were married, it was a good thing, I learned how to drive, because that way he still had patience. Most husbands don't have the patience, but when they're still courting, they do. And I learned to drive in this huge boat it was like an upside down boat, this Buick with a tiny window in the back. And my third try, I made it in the parking. But at that time we had a little VW, and we took off and we went to Deep Creek Lake, where we had gone as with friends before, and so, but we didn't stay very long. We ran out of money, and then on the way back we stayed a few more days with Sarah and her husband in their living room. We came home, and
well, they lived in Washington D.C. too?
Yeah, they lived outside.
So why did you stay in their living room instead of going home?
Yeah, we could have, but it was too early to really, we really didn't want to go home yet. We could combine it with a visit,
Yeah. So
it was,
okay.
I don't know why we did this, let's say. And they were glad to see us.
Yeah.
So it was, but then, because Dad had all this debt which I didn't know, and it was awful when people knocked at the door, and at Christmas Tante Herta came, which was very nice, and we had a wonderful Christmas together, and Dad had this sewing machine for me but hadn't paid for it. And so that was tough when they come and want to repossess it, and so the first few years of our marriage were pretty tough. And, but I must say, Dad never got angry. He just got drunk, but was always good-natured. So,
and you were married, what was the date?
August 23rd, 1958. So, can we break a minute? Or?
Yeah, definitely.
I want to know what I can't remember if I said anything about Dad's life.
Well, I was thinking, okay. So, yeah, just talk about, the early married life and what you were doing.
Yeah. So we still lived in that little apartment, and we could go by bus into the city. They even had streetcars, and I found. After I went to Austria, that's right. I didn't even have and came back. No, I now remember. What did we do? Because at that time Dad worked for a patent attorney, and he was able to get the green card for me, which you need in order to work. And when I had that, I applied the first place I found, and that was an airplane parts company or something. I had to add up numbers and numbers and numbers. And then the one lady there, some say, said, would you like to work someplace else? My husband is the general director of Washington Hotel, which is almost next to the White House. And I said, oh sure, because I wasn't happy with what I was doing. And there I became a catering secretary, and that was a company out of Galveston, Texas. And now this was in 1960, or 59, 60, I think. Yeah, during that time, in the late 50s. And as a catering secretary, you have to plan functions, and so people would come in and you look at your big pages and say, okay, you want this, and then you have a menu, what would you like, and then you have to set it up. You call housekeeping and you talk to the one who sets up the table, and then at night in bed you think, did I order the flowers, or things like that. I mean, it was very strenuous, but it was also very fun, except for one thing. Since it was from Texas, when people called from Texas, I could not tell the difference between a Texan and a black person. And of course, in those days, no blacks allowed, which was a horrible thing to do, because I thought about it then and I always will. And so sometimes they would come in and I could not, and I had to say, I'm sorry, we're all booked. It was outright a lie, and you could see it. And sometimes I could not get them to go away, and so I would have to show him the rooms, and then I heard the voices, we don't take niggers. And I mean, that was really a bad part about it, and that only happened once. But if somebody from Galveston called, once the general director came and said, why didn't you pass on this phone call? This was my person from Galveston, and I thought, so that was, and my boss actually was from Corsica, and he had a terrible accent, and of course I had my German accent, and people would call and couldn't understand him, and then they asked for someone else, and then they got me. Well, he was mostly, because he felt he was also the maître d', and so he was mostly in the restaurants where I was really, did everything myself, and then I felt bad, and then there was the residence manager, and I wrote letters for him, so I actually had two bosses. It was a very fun time, and I enjoyed what I was doing, but it was very strenuous and very hectic. And then came the opportunity from Dad's Aunt Hilde, his mother's sister, who owned the hotel, and said, would we want to come over and take over the hotel, because Dad had hotel training.
So this was,
That was
not the
in
hotel
60.
you're in, but the Hotel Germania.
Yeah, in Austria, yeah. And so we sold, and we had some other friends that I met through working at the hotel, a lovely couple, and that was Gray and Tony and Julian later in England. And so we...
So they worked at the hotel?
She did, yeah. They were both at, the wonderful, what is it, in Virginia, the college, something in Mary and...
William and Mary?
William and Mary, yeah. And she became pregnant, so they had to quit, and then they had Julian. And I remember she was so sick when she was pregnant, and she had some false teeth, and I didn't know it. And she threw up and went down the toilet, and they had no money whatsoever. So we left the most of, I think we asked $100 because we needed some money too for everything that we had. And we took back records and, hardly anything, but still it's quite a girl. So we went on a freighter, because you could go on the freighter, and they take, I think, up to 12 people, and you had to be a certain age, not too young and not too old, unless you have a doctor's permission or something. Excuse me. You have to cut that out.
I'm going to take a break for a second.
No. So we went from the Bronx to Antwerp in Belgium. Maybe I should take a break.
Yeah.
I'm not used to talking so much, Pete.
That's surprising.
I usually not talk end on end. You know, this camera is blinking at me. Do you know that? Did it do that all the time?
I think so.
Okay.
It says it's recording. I hope it is.
Okay. So.
All right, hang on 1 second. Okay. So you were starting to say you left from the Bronx.
Yes, and we landed in Antwerp with our suitcase, and then from there we went somehow by train to Austria. And so that's where we were for that 1 year. Actually, I stayed 1.5 years because that's when Susie was born. But it just didn't work out, and mostly again, 2 reasons. There were all these family members. And there was his mother, and she was not a problem. His aunt, the hotel owner, her husband, who was little mentally from First World War. He had a little bit of a problem, and then Hertha, you know, and they all decided what to do. And when Dad, who was supposed to know everything about the hotel, said something, then they would say, "What do you know? You're just a kid." You know, that was a kind of. And then, of course, I was in charge of the wine cellar, and you know what that meant. So
What?
that Dad would get the key and get himself something to drink. And
Well, couldn't he anyway if he was a manager?
no, because but you wouldn't drink day and night, you know. I mean, you would get a bottle or something.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, and because of that, he was. And then there was the other one who was the bookkeeper, and that's what he was. I mean, he could never handle people. He had a lovely wife. In fact, she went to school with Dad, to the hotel school, but he was not a people person, and which Dad was. And but because of his drinking, and it was horrible. You know, we had no money, and we had one afternoon. I had off one afternoon. He had off, and then we had to take Tante Hertha and Onkel Adolf on trips, and a couple of times I had to go to Tante Hertha and ask for money because there just wasn't anything. And so you know, and Dad knew it, and he felt uncomfortable, and he wouldn't do what he was supposed to do. And so after years, they decided we should go back. And but I was pregnant, so Dad went back and found a job and started over. And
Well, where were you living when?
in the hotel, we had one room in the hotel. Yeah, with awful circumstances. And
Where did you eat? In the
we
dining?
ate in the hotel. I mean, the food was no problem. But you know, in this apartment was mother-in-law, Erna, we, Dieter and Christa, Fritz and Edith. And the kids, no, the kids weren't born then, but later on they still had their 2, after we had gone, they both had their 2 kids. Horrible circumstances.
Was this the same apartment that Dieter lived in later? That like I saw like in the
Yeah,
70s, the same
yeah,
one?
yeah, must have been before they had the house.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's where they lived.
So that's where you lived with
Yeah.
Dad and his mom.
Yeah, and so then I waited to have Susie, and I must say they were very nice to me then, and not at first, because I was German, and Austrians are very proud people, and I was a poor German, East German, you know, so it took a while before I was accepted, but in the end I was, very much so. And so And I helped, and they appreciated, even though I was pregnant, that I did this. And for some reason, Omi Ficht had a knack knowing exactly when the baby would arrive, and the doctor said one day, and I went by it, but she was the one who was right. And because I had the wrong date, all our plans had to be changed, because we arranged it to see Fritz from East Germany was coming out to have an interview in Hamburg. Then he would have been out of East Germany. And Ali helped me to get up there and
Get up to Bremen?
To Bremen. And we all wanted to meet there. But because Sue was 2 weeks late, Fritz had gone back, and this was in 1961, and as soon as he was back, the wall came up. But it's not what God had planned. So we.
So let's go back to this. So you're living in Austria, and Ali was living in Bremen.
Ali was not in Bremen yet. She was in Tübingen. I think she was still becoming a nurse, or was a nurse, or she could have already. Yeah, she wasn't. I don't think she was in Bremen yet. No. She
and Fritz was going to Bremen.
Fritz was going to Hamburg, which is an hour away from Bremen,
right,
to have an interview. And when he was there, they said they don't take anyone away from the Berlin Staatsoper. He was still with the Berlin Staatsoper, and because there were good terms on it. But had he been out earlier and the wall had gone up, then he would have been on the west side, and then he could have said, listen, I can't go back, you can have me. And you don't have to have bad feelings taking me away from East Germany. Well, it's not, that was the plan, how plans never work out. And so then, but Erna, Mother Ficht, Omi Ficht, stayed with me at the hospital. She was really very nice. And it was one of those old deliveries with a midwife, and the doctor didn't get along. The doctor went home, and I had problems, and but everything went well. And but I was really went through a mill, and old-fashioned, and and then Ali came to help me, and then we inquired what do we need in order to get back to America, and it said nothing. And so I had a letter that said that Dad was looking forward to us, and he said, you don't need anything else. And so we come to Austria, and we want to go out to Germany, and the Austrians say, kidnapping, no way. So I was, but fortunately there again was family, and they had connections. Zunhild, I don't know if you remember her, it's another cousin of Dad's. Her dad was the brother of Omi Ficht, and so we could stay there for a day or two until they got the papers that we could go to Germany. And so then we went to Bremen, and it's okay, now we know Bremen.
Yep. All right, great job.